in this case who are really the bad guys. If they had truly loved this baby, they would have turned the child over at a very young age and not let this go on for so long.
We'll let you respond, but I want first to have our other guests. How about you, Mr. Kirsch, in Indianapolis? What's the lesson from the DeBoer case?
I think the lesson here is that people who are adopting need to be dealing with reputable and experienced adoption agencies or adoption attorneys. They need to be very careful about working with people that don't fully understand the law. The mistake that was made in this case was made early on. There were two mistakes. The first is that when the birth father, Schmidt, came forward, there should have been a blood test immediately to determine whether or not he was the father. That test did not occur until almost 9 months later. The second mistake was as soon as they realized that Mr. Schmidt was the father of the child, they should have been counseled to relinquish custody of Jessica at that time. Under Iowa law, and this is under Iowa law, this is not national law, but under Iowa law, the consent of the birth father is required. They did not have the consent of the birth father, and they were never going to win this case.
But in the DeBoer case, they didn't go to an agency because I gather the wait would have been too long. So they went not underground, but they went through the private route. So the mistake was not hiring an attorney?
Well, I don't know the attorney that represented the DeBoers, but an experienced adoption attorney should have told them, or would have told them, I believe, that when they did not have the consent of the birth father, that they needed to relinquish custody of the child at that time. It's just not an issue under Iowa law whether or not they can proceed with an adoption without the father's consent. They cannot proceed with an adoption without the father's consent.
In San Francisco, Ms. Barron, how about your opinion on the DeBoer case?
I've been listening with great interest to all the people, and I think we all agree we need change. I think we all agree that the various states have different laws which can cause difficulty. Certainly everybody in this case was a victim. The DeBoers were badly counseled. The birth parents could not have the law work for them. The child certainly is the greatest victim of all. We need federal regulation, which we don't have. States' laws need to be brought more into compliance with one another. And birth parents need to have counseling. You know, you need counseling while you're pregnant, and you need counseling directly afterward. If a birth mother has any ambivalence, the child should never be placed. There needs to be a time to look at this and to decide, because children can stay with root families a lot more. This is one case with a lot of publicity, but you know there are hundreds of cases just like this in courts in every state of the United States right now, and they're all causing great suffering and harm to everyone.
All right, let me go back now to Professor Bartholet and ask you to respond to Ms. Dusky's comments. She said that you're in favor of quick adoption that moves children as fast as they can be moved. What's your answer to that?
Well, I am in favor of expediting adoption, but mainly for the sake of all the hundreds of thousands of kids who need homes. I mean, I do believe that people who want to adopt have rights, but my main concern is that I think children have rights to homes. And if we look at the foster care system in this country, we have close to 500,000 children sitting in foster care, and a lot of them are sitting there because we value birth ties, birth links so highly that although we'll remove these children or let their parents surrender them to the foster care system, we won't free them up. I mean,
but isn't that logical for the courts to lean on the side of the theory that nature over nurture?
I don't think it's logical to lean on the side of nature as much as we do. I don't think it's logical to take a 2.5-year-old child and say she has to be transferred now without any consideration whatsoever of what I would call relationship rights, which I think both she has and the DeBoer has. And I don't think it's natural to keep children in foster care, insist that they stay there for 2, 3, 5, and 10 years, which is what we're doing in this country, and refuse to free them up from birth parents when in many cases we know we're not going to put those kids back with the birth parents.
May I interrupt out here in San Francisco?
Sure, go ahead, Ms. Barron.
I think it needs to be said that the cutting edge of adoption are these older children, these sibling groups, these handicapped kids, these kids who need real permanency planning. There are many, many of these children already free for adoption. The problem here is that there are too few newborn babies and too many infertile couples desperate to get newborn babies. These are the cases that cause this kind of problem. And that's what we need to be addressing. Our federal government should be on the side of family preservation, but also on the side of working toward getting parents to take on these children.
Now, Ms. Dusky, do you believe, for instance, that children do have rights?
Oh, of course they have
do.
rights.
And are they superior to those of the of this unwed father who showed up?
This case is a sort of, in a sense, out of left field. My question is to Ms. Bartlett, have you looked at any of the studies that show the trouble that adopted individuals have later on in their life? You can take every index from children and adults in therapy, people in mental institutions, alcoholics. You can go right up to mass murderers of women, including one we're familiar with in New York called Joel Rifkin. And you can look at Son of Sam, you can look at the Philadelphia Shoemaker. I mean, people who study mass murderers find that that's one of the indexes of who the profile is likely to be, is an adopted individual. So if you take all of that information and say, well, you know, the child has no rights here, it should be with these, the relationship rights are greater than the birth rights, how do you answer the fact that, yes, it's going to be traumatic because the De Beers have made it that way, but what do you do with the rest of this person's life? She won't grow up with somebody she looks like, there'll never be any, you know, you're just like your uncle or aunt. I mean,
okay, let her answer.
Actually, I've looked at all those studies, and I'm so glad you asked that question, because the kind of claims you're making are the classic claims of the search movement, that adoptees...
Of the which movement?
Search movement.
Explain that.
There's a search movement which Concerned United Birth Parents, CUB, the group that Kara Clausen here went and met with before she changed her mind and decided
Kara Clausen
to reclaim her child.
CUB
is part of the search movement. CUB is part of what helped Kara Clausen decide that she was going to reclaim her child. Both these women are parts of this search movement. The search movement puts out this literature that claims that all adoptees are damaged goods for life, all people who've adopted, who've had infertility, suffer lifelong pain, and all birth mothers suffer lifelong pain. I have looked at the stuff they call evidence, and frankly, I believe it is garbage, all of it. I have looked at the only empirical studies that exist, and I have read them, and I think those studies show absolutely that children adopted in infancy do every bit as well as children raised with their birth parents, and that adoption works for both adoptees, for adoptive parents, and for birth mothers, if you compare it to the existing alternatives. The only damage that you see showing up in adopted children, I believe, shows up in the children who are adopted not in infancy, but after lengthy delays, the kind of delays the adoption system causes. And that's when you see damage. If kids are adopted early, if we don't prevent their adoption the way we do systematically in this country, they do not suffer from this severance of the birth link.
Mr. Kirsch, in Indianapolis, what side do you come down on? Do you believe that, that the statistics show a rise of a higher incident of mass murderers among adopted children? I mean, you said you do 140 or so adoptions a year. What's your experience?
Yes, I have to agree completely with Professor Bartholet. I don't know the other woman that commented, and unfortunately I'm in a studio where I can't even see who she is. But she's talking from another planet. The families that I work with, both the birth families and the adoptive parents, pursue an adoption because they are trying to do what's best for the children. The birth parents proceed with adoptions because they find themselves in a position not to be able to care for the children the way they want to. They're not giving away the baby. They're not giving up the baby. They're making a plan for the child's future to care for the child, if not by themselves, by an adoptive family. Children that are adopted are just like everybody else. They don't have horns. They're not mass murderers. It's just ridiculous. The real problem with this case is that it's drawing too much attention on one circumstance. And what happened to Jessica and the birth family and the adoptive parents in this case is horrendous. But it's an isolated case. It does not foretell anything about adoption in this country. It was a bad circumstance.
But isn't it true that over half the adoption cases involve unknown fathers? Well, who now might very easily identify themselves? As I understand it, it's put a fairly chilling effect on adoption.
I don't think so.
Because of the danger of the unknown fathers coming forth.
Well, I don't think so. In many states, Indiana included, there's a procedure to deal with that. And you know, the other thing, from a birth father's perspective, you hear about these unknown birth fathers and they're not notified about the child until after the baby is placed. The birth fathers were there at the time of conception. My feeling is that if a man has sex with a woman, he has some obligation to see if she's pregnant, and if she is pregnant, to help her through the pregnancy. I don't think these birth fathers can just sit back and say, well, gosh, I didn't know she was pregnant. I didn't know that. When he had sex with her, there was a natural, certainly a possibility that she would become pregnant, and he had an obligation to check at that point.
Ms. Barron, in San Francisco, why has adoption become such a big business?
Well, it's become a big business because there are fewer babies available and more couples wanting to adopt those fewer babies. And we've got this great creative merchandising. We advertise for babies next to the Volvos in the newspaper columns. We set up systems where we go in and try to buy babies from poor married couples in Appalachia. We recruit teenagers in high schools and tell them that they can have their cake and eat it too. They can know their baby but have no responsibility to raise it. And you know, it's time we got out of the big business. We took the greed and the profit out of adoption. Adoption is not responsible for our foster home system, not in the least. What's responsible is our child welfare system in this country, which doesn't help support single parents to keep their children. Parents who planned all along to keep their children, but find that down the road they can't. And you can't mix apples and oranges in this discussion. These newborn baby adoptions come out of a whole different piece of cloth.
All right, now,
Can I just make one specific factual point, which is that if you look at the statistics on single birth mothers, 98% of them are keeping their children.
That's right.
I believe we live in a society that, far from coercing these women into surrendering to these greedy, infertile couples, we live in a society in which we shame birth mothers into feeling that they absolutely have to keep their children. It's unnatural to give them away. I think that reproductive rights for women ought to include the right to surrender, as well as the right to adopt a child who needs a home.
Now, our time is getting short. Let me ask each one of you in turn, if you would please, to tell me how you think the adoption system ought to be fixed in the United States. May I ask you to go first?
Well, one of the things that should be done is that for the women, the young women, or anybody who wants to keep a child, there should be more systems in place. Society still today has a tendency to think of the women who are even thinking about giving up their children for adoption as women who should be punished, as women who are bad women. I don't think there's been such a sea change in attitudes from the 50s and even on before that, even though people keep the babies. So someone like Clara Clausen gets, branded immediately, oh, she signed the baby away, which, by the way, she had already been convinced to waive her rights, and she did it in 40 hours rather than 72 with the lawyer she thought was her lawyer when it was, in fact, the De Beer lawyer. So that's the kind of thing that should stop. The second thing that would change a lot in this country, if adoption was not a system whereby we anticipated that the child could be sort of whisked away from one set of parents or one parent or whatever and dropped into a new setting where there was no connection with the past. There are always going to be babies who need to be adopted and need homes, infants and older children. But we should stop pretending here in America, one of the few places in the world that does it, that the rest of the past, the heritage, doesn't matter at all. Adoptees and adoptive parents would have a better time getting along and forming the bonds they need if there wasn't this kind of secrecy that still prevails in this country. The secrecy, most of the laws in all the states except Kansas and Alaska have these laws. Only in those two states do adoptees have the unchallenged right. There's other systems in place. Most of those laws, I will just say, were put in place under the aegis of powerful legislators who were adoptive fathers.
Well, let me get some other view. Mr. Kirsch in Indianapolis? You got less than a minute to do it.
Okay.
I bet you can, though.
I bet I can. The only problem, I think, in this country in adoption is that not enough states take into account what's in the best interests of children. I don't believe that there should be federal law governing adoptions. I think each of the states is capable of doing that, and I think a lot of state legislatures will look at this issue, the Clausen case, and write into their law a requirement that the best interest of the child always be considered in granting an adoption or changing custody of a child. As far as the other comments about mass murders and opening records and all of those things, those are side issues that are being presented by people who have their own agenda to advance. They have nothing to do with what's in the best interest of adoption or of children.
Well, let me close the discussion there by thanking all of you, Ms. Barron in San Francisco, Mr. Kirsch in Indianapolis, Ms. Dusky, and Professor Bartholet.
Finally tonight, essayist Clarence Page of the Chicago Tribune has some thoughts about the hate preachers.
A federal jury has decided Afrocentric Professor Leonard Jeffries should get his old job back. He can again be chairman of Black Studies at the City University of New York, where he teaches unusual lessons about skin pigment. Lessons that say white skin is the mark of ice people, not nice people, ice people, demonic, warlike people. Black skin, on the other hand, identifies the sun people, serene, peace-loving, and forever victimized by those evil ice people.
Come on, move! Hey, move!
Jeffries also teaches that Jews bankrolled the slave trade and conspired with Italians to exploit blacks in Hollywood with movies that degraded the black image.
I don't know nothing about birthing babies.
Jeffries has been widely denounced for saying these things, but he also has been widely praised. He often is surrounded by adoring students, many of whom serve as his bodyguards. Does Jeffries have the right to say these things? Of course he does. Maybe the more important question is this: why does anyone listen?
I have a dream.
An odd political and social tragedy has occurred in the Black Freedom Movement since the 1960s. A coalition that brought blacks, Jews, Catholics, and Protestants together for civil rights gains and political empowerment broke apart into fragments of identity politics. Black Power, Black Panthers, Afrocentrism. Much of this was natural and constructive. After centuries of degradation by white racism, black Americans needed to rediscover themselves and learn to love themselves all over again. But much of it also was destructive. It gave rise to black demagogues, the Al Sharptons and Louis Farrakhan's, among others.
Don't I have a right to criticize Jewish behavior if I think it is incorrect?
Who exploited historic fault lines of ethnic identity and conned others into burning bridges legitimate black leaders had built to other communities, to feminists, Asians, liberal Jews, Hispanics, and just about everybody else who would work with blacks to build a workable, pluralistic society. Most of us know better, I think, but we don't speak out much, especially in public, especially in front of the white folks. It violates black community etiquette to speak out in a way that airs our dirty laundry in public. We don't want to bring disunity to the community.
Thank you.
Most of all, we don't want to give aid and comfort to white demagogues like David Duke, the former Klan leader who almost became governor of Louisiana last year by playing the same old demagogue con job. Why do we listen? Hitler, the Lord High Demon of demagogues, believed in the big lie as a route to power. The lie so big it used up your enemy's energies just knocking it down. But Hitler also knew the value of the truth. He got the attention of embattled Germans by telling them what they wanted to hear about their own government's corruption and ineptitude. People won't listen to lies all the time. You must get their attention with some truth. Jeffries tells the truth, too. For example, when he says Jews bankroll the slave trade, he's partly right. Sephardic Jews in the sugar industry brought many black slaves to the West Indies, but they were hardly alone. The slave trade was a rainbow coalition of exploitation, invented largely by Arab Muslims, brought to the West and operated mostly by Christians, and eagerly embraced by black Africans who sold their own brethren into slavery. Looking for blame? There's plenty to go around. Those who exaggerate the role of Jews have some other agenda, closer to home in mind. A good demagogue needs someone to demonize. No need to let facts get in the way.
Rights have rights.
David Duke learned this lesson well, too. Most of his voters would not vote for the old Duke, dressed up in his neo-Nazi outfit or Klan hood, but they will vote for the new Duke, dressed up in a suit and tie, speaking the new code of racial politics, welfare mothers, quotas, liberal elites, and high taxes. Legitimate issues turned cleverly into rhetoric of polarization, of them, not us. It's not just black Americans who are vulnerable to the demagogue's message. It's everyone who feels surrounded and under siege. It's everyone who desperately wants to blame their problems on some outsider, a scapegoat, and other. It's not the demagogues outside as much as our own demons inside that we should fear. It is our own freedom that unravels unless we find the inner strength to stand up against the madness and say, that's enough. No more lies. Only truth can set us free. I'm Clarence Page.
Again, the major stories of this Monday. House and Senate negotiators reached agreement on a budget deal. Democratic leaders said details of the plan would be announced tomorrow. The Mississippi River dropped at St. Louis, but towns downriver had more flooding after levees gave way. A 2-year-old girl was returned to her natural parents, ending a custody battle with a couple who had raised her. And President Clinton downplayed reports of unilateral airstrikes by the United States in Bosnia. Good night, Roger.
Good night, Jim. That's the NewsHour. We'll be back tomorrow night with coverage of the budget deal from Capitol Hill. I'm Roger Mudd. Thank you and good night.
Major funding for the MacNeil Lehrer NewsHour has been provided by the Archer Daniels Midland Company, ADM, supermarket to the world. And by New York Life. Yet another example of New York Life's wise investment philosophy. And by PepsiCo. And by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by the annual financial support from viewers like you.
I'm Nancy Marshall with OPB Radio. Tomorrow morning from 5 to 9 on OPB Radio, it's Morning Edition. Tomorrow, an American journalist describes the fate of a Chinese couple who gave her information. That's tomorrow morning on OPB Radio.
Video cassettes of the MacNeil Lehrer NewsHour are available from PBS Video. Call 1-800-328-PBS-1.
This is PBS.